All right, we live. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Give me a sign if you can hear me, boy. Welcome to this live stream. It is Thursday, October 10th, in the year of our Lord, 2019, 7:33 p.m. Eastern Time. Sounds like a magical number. I don't believe in magical numbers, but if there ever was such a number, 733 sounds like it would be one. I'm extremely tired. I'm trying to wake up. So, recently I've been getting in the habit of trying to wake up with a live stream because this is how my mind regenerates out of its dark, deep inactivity modes by taking some uppers, drinking some coffee, and trying to talk about stuff that I'm interested in. And I'm a little self-conscious about the presentation of this channel because, if one thing bothers me very deeply, it would be this culture of people that exist on YouTube, especially, that just kind of are like, hey, look at me. Like, I'm not qualified to talk about anything, but I'm just going to talk about it. So I'm not sure how I can remedy this reality, except to let you guys know that I'm self-conscious about this. I only have a degree in art. I'm not an expert on anything except maybe 16 millimeter film. And even then, I don't know if I would call myself an expert. But, I just like to talk about stuff. I do hope to maybe get a PhD one day in philosophy, but who the fuck can afford that? Not me. I haven't even made one payment on my art degree. I'm gonna be one of these people that ends up in jail for non-payment, but fuck it, whatever. I think by the time they actually put me in jail for non-payment, I'll probably need somewhere to live anyway, so that sounds great. Free rent in jail. Free food. Fuck yeah. Fuck yeah. Anyway, I'm not an expert, but I put it out to Twitter, like, what should I talk about? Because I want to talk about something, and that's not to seem like I don't have a topic. I always have lots of topics, but I wasn't just feeling inspired by anything. And someone said, you should talk about the psychology of shadows, which I'm not entirely familiar with, but I clicked the Wikipedia page they linked me to, and this is a concept that comes from Jungian psychology, or Jungian. I'm not really entirely sure how to pronounce it. I think it's Carl Jung, right? I mean, he's German, right? Carl Jung. Everyone knows the famous mystical Nazi hippie guy that whose psychology I think was key in developing the Myers-Briggs test, if I'm not wrong. I don't know too much about this stuff. I know I'm an INTJ. I used to be an INTP. Not like it fucking matters. Myers-Briggs is like astrology for people who don't want to admit that they're like, that they like want to be into this or something. Am I wrong? What the fuck does this shit mean? INTJ, INTP, whatever. I'm just glad I got the J instead of the P because I'm definitely judging. I'm always judging. But I don't know much about Jung or Freud, really. We're going to be reading Freud in our book club. By the way, if any of you are not members, please come be members because we're coming close to the 21st century and we're going to be reading a lot of modern thinkers. It's going to be really fun. Freud is one of those. I don't really know much about Freud. Don't know much about Jung either. Don't know much about psychology in general. And that is definitely a conscious decision. I personally am really not super intrigued by psychology. I mean, are you guys? Can we get some We hear some talking in the chat. How do you guys feel about psychology? I personally just feel like psychology as an institution. I mean, look, I don't want to like be mean or anything because I think that there is a lot of interesting work that has come out of psychology and is still coming out of psychology. But my problem with psychology as an institution is like it's just held to no standard. There's no real criteria for like how to do psychology well. And this is why I think there's just such a broad range of the quality of work that comes out of psychology, you know? Like the spectrum is just so fucking wide. On the one end, you know, you have people I think doing like pretty reasonably interesting work. You know, trying to create a language essentially where we can take things like neuroscientific data and give it some sort of like meaningful clinical application. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we just have like fucking weirdo, like self help quacks that become billionaires telling people to like, you know, I don't fucking know, do this or do that to live a actual self actualized life. Somebody says therapy is good. I think therapy is good for a lot of people. I think it probably depends on the person and the therapist. But, you know, I see that more as like social work, you know. I think that psychology's the best thing that can come out of psychology probably right now is like its social work applications, you know. I think most people benefit from being able to like get some sort of third party more neutral perspective on what's happening in their life, you know? So in that sense, I think therapy is good. It's good for people to have sounding boards in a sense that are people that aren't necessarily invested in their life. Because, you know, when you ask your friends for advice and stuff, even if they're completely removed from whatever situation you might be looking for some sort of advice on, they're still a part of your life. So I wouldn't really consider them a third party. I think having someone that really is more neutral is probably helpful to a lot of people. So in that sense, I see it more as like social work, you know, which is a great thing. And I think a lot of people benefit from it. Somebody says, well, the same person that said therapy is good says, IMO, my current view, there's too much self in our world, and I'd be most interested in psychology of intersubjectivity. Well, that's interesting because that's why I gave this title this thing, because if I have anything insightful to say, which who knows if I do, but what interests me most, excuse me, I'm burping. What interests me most about these questions of psychology and where psychology might improve, I think, really has to do with like a philosophical question that a lot of this stuff, especially the work of like Freud and Jung, I think, really revolve around, which are these questions of the conscious mind and the subconscious mind, you know. I believe that Freud is the first person, correct me if I'm wrong, like I said, I don't really know much about psychology or its history, but I believe that Freud is the first person to put forth this idea of there being a subconscious. And, you know, all different thinkers have different sorts of opinions on exactly how you can define the subconscious. But I think a popular idea is the subconscious is basically the cumulative sum of your conscious mind, I guess, that is not in direct focus at any given moment, you know. So a lot of people attribute things like having a strange feeling in your gut or something that can be described as intuition when you're, you know, in a specific circumstance and you might not know exactly why you're feeling a certain way. That people will use these kinds of illustrations to talk about things like the subconscious. And this, I think, is really interesting because I feel like your entire theory of psychology can be dramatically altered just based on what you think about the conscious mind and how it operates, you know? I've actually seen this come up in a lot of conversations recently. I think that this is maybe something the public is starting to become more interested in, especially since, you know, we have things like Elon Musk out here basically asserting to the public that he is going to be able to create some sort of interface where, you know, he can interface the neural structures of our brain and of our conscious experience with some sort of digital interface as well. And in that sense, you know, it's reasonable to think that soon we can completely digitally interface our brains and our conscious experience. And a lot of people, like myself, are incredibly skeptical of these kinds of claims because, from a philosophical perspective, there's really no reason to think that consciousness exists as some sort of independent entity, right? This is something I'm doing a video on soon because this is a really popular topic, so I don't want to say too much. But an illustration I use often to talk to other people about my ideas of consciousness that I think is sort of intriguing. Maybe I've said it already in here before, who knows? I talk a lot, but I like to think about any of our senses. You know, there's 5 senses, right? Seeing, hearing, touch, smell, taste. If you were to isolate one of these and think about your hearing, right? What is hearing? Hearing is a word, a concept that we came up with to describe our feelings of being able to hear. You know, my hearing is just a concept to describe the fact that I can hear. But do you think that I could isolate my hearing, take my hearing outside of myself and put it in some sort of vacuum or interface it with a computer and digitally replicate my hearing? You know, like maybe in one sense of the word, but would it really be like the same thing? This is kind of how I feel about consciousness. It's like I don't know, and I'm not claiming to know, but I see no reason for why I would think that my consciousness is a thing that exists independently any more than my hearing does, you know. For me, I think that consciousness, as far as I know, is simply my feelings of being conscious, you know. So in that sense, I'm a conscious being. I describe my consciousness as this feeling of being conscious, but I don't know what reason there is for me to think that perhaps I could take my consciousness and remove it from myself, that it could have some sort of independent properties, that it could be like replicated digitally or something, you know. And I feel like contrasting it with the hearing example is like a pretty good illustration of why I feel this way. And these ideas, I think, are really relevant when you're trying to have any sort of theory of psychology because, you know, depending on what properties our consciousness might actually have, how it's actually structured, of course, a thing like, you know, Freud's whole theory of the subconscious will be totally turned on its head. Same with Jung, you know, it seems like a lot of their psychological theories revolve around these ideas of consciousness where they're basically giving it like distinct properties, but these are all just assumed, right? We don't really know. And how could we know? We can't really know. We can't really know anything, right? We can only go with what seems most plausible in any given moment. And the more that we research, the more plausible things become. And the more true things become, you know. Nothing is ever true or untrue. It only seems more true or less true. So I think that this is really interesting when considering theories of subconscious in general. And I've thought about this a lot. I think that my problem is not so much with this creation of a concept for the subconscious so much as it is a lack of consideration for exactly what consciousness period is, you know. Because I think in like common usage, when people have these sorts of discussions about consciousness and subconsciousness, A thing that I seem to encounter a lot, I feel like I encounter a lot, is people almost characterize the conscious mind as simply that which you are like articulating back to yourself with language. And I feel like that's silly, you know? Like, what is your conscious mind versus your subconscious, really? You know, like, is there actually really some division, some line that we think exists? Like, what is the line? I think in a lot of explanations for this, the line really is literally speaking to your head in language. You know what I mean? Like, what would be a conscious thought? If I look, let's use the the example we use literally every damn fucking day. This apple, the red apple. I look at the apple, right? I see it's red. I'm I'm sitting there looking at the apple, okay? I might not necessarily articulate back to myself in that moment, look, this apple is red. So what am I conscious of in that moment, and what is my subconscious doing in this moment? You know, is there really some like stark division? Am I fully subconscious in that moment? What if I'm looking at a thing and I'm not thinking back to myself with speech at all, you know? I was thinking about this recently. Sorry, I don't know if I'm making a lot of sense. Like I said, I'm trying to wake up. Let me drink some more coffee and see if I can become a little more articulate here. Because these concepts are difficult. I was thinking about this recently, watching a YouTube video, and I was like, wow, you know, isn't it like amazing and a wonder that I can sit here and watch this video? And in the video I was watching specifically, it was some sort of like, not instructional, it was like an educational video. And I think there was like a narration and then like also a visual that like, I don't know, was like someone walking into a room doing these things, you know, whatever. So like already like the video being presented to me is so multi-tiered. There's so much going on. For one, I'm aware that I'm watching a video, some content created by some person with the purpose of communicating something to me. Then within this video, they're giving me like a visual illustration of a thing happening. That was just sort of like some sort of illustration to support their point. But, you know, like it might have even been like some sort of historical reenactment thing. I don't know. But basically, like the layers of things happening, the fact that I'm experiencing this through a screen, the fact that I know at that moment it was created for me to learn something. Then I'm also watching this like historical reenactment that exists within the piece, and I'm not articulating any of what's actually happening during this process back to myself, yet I comprehend all of it. I don't sit here and think as I'm watching YouTube videos, wait, what's going on now? What is this? Okay, this is a historical reenactment of the story that this man, the narrator, has tried to produce for me so I understand this concept. I don't really have to sit and tell myself anything about any of this, but I'm conscious of what's happening, you know? And it seems to me like, well, then where, to use this example, like where would my subconscious be, you know? Like, where is this line drawn if such a line exists? Like, what am I actually consciously aware of as I'm watching this video if I'm really not even thinking about anything? You know, even a thing like recalling the words that they're using to explain these ideas to me. Do we sit and like think like, what does that word mean? What does that word mean? What does that word mean? Like definitions of the subconscious, it seems like are always in use just when you use language, right? Because like whenever we use language, we don't often sit and think, unless it's a word we're not overly familiar with. We don't sit and think, wait, what does that word mean? What does that word mean? What does that word mean? It's like we're constantly calling the definitions of words as we understand them, like in real time, just like fucking fast as fuck. Like, is that subconscious or is that conscious? I guess what I don't understand is what the subconscious is really supposed to be. But I definitely do think that there is something intriguing and compelling about the idea that, you know, our brain likely seems to store recallable memory in ways that we might not be able to directly access. And I think language is probably a great example of this. I don't have to sit here and think hard to use my language. My language has been it's used so often by myself. I don't have to sit and think about it unless I encounter a word I don't use often. That feels like, something that's been hard programmed into me. Where is language stored in my brain? Is it stored in my brain? Is it stored in the cloud? Where the fuck do memories exist? How do we recall them? At what speeds? Does it change depending on how often we use them? I imagine that like my language software since I talk like all damn day long, every damn day, I imagine that that's like easier to recall than like, I don't know what year Blade Runner came out, which I think was 1982 or 4. See, I'm not sure, but I feel like I know somewhere deep in my subconscious. How do we know? How do we know? I've heard too that the way we do things changes our neural structures. Like, it's hard to even analyze because we don't have very large populations of humans that do things like don't use language, period. The only real population of humans we have to compare to like something like us when it comes to matters of language would be like our baby population. But baby brains are just like not even fully developed, period. It's really difficult to try to even do studies or research into these sorts of things. Like, how does using language affect our actual neural structures? Which I assume it likely does, because from what I believe, there's been lots of research into questions of whether or not our neurological structures change depending on like repeated activities. Why did I decide not to write something about free will? Funny. But yeah, we don't know anything really about our conscious experience. But, this is why we're here. This is why we're Phenomenology Club, because phenomenology is very psychological, even as a philosophical mode. But what elevates it out of something that is only philosophical, I think, is the fact that it's not prescriptive. Psychology sort of exists to address assumed problems, things that are assumed to be problems. The goal of psychology is to help individuals with what might be troubling about their psychological experiences, but phenomenology has no such agenda. Phenomenology essentially just wants to create a philosophical language essentially around, conscious experience. In many ways, phenomenology, I think, is like very, it's like the science of, it's like the language of neuroscience, essentially, I think. And this is why you see in a lot of neuroscientific literature, they're actually using phenomenology as a word and phenomenological concepts. Phenomenology and neuroscience literature are very intertwined. There's a lot of interesting work coming out of this. What was I going to say? I was going to say something. Just playing. Trying to wake up. So, if anyone in the chat knows a lot about Jung's ideas on shadows, tell me about them because I'm interested. But, yeah, like to me, I was browsing the Wikipedia article and to me it just sounds like trash. Like, oh god, I'll read a little bit. This is just stupid. It's like, okay, maybe there's something to the ideas there, but why do you have to give it this like ultra poetic mythical language? Because you're a fucking Nazi hippie. What's up with this Nazi hippie intersection, by the way? Like, we got Manson, we got Jung. Why do Nazis and hippies, why is there a crossover? It doesn't seem like there should be one, but there is. You know, I guess Nazis and like mysticism intersect pretty hard, so I guess it makes sense because hippies and mystics intersect pretty hard. Who are your favorite Nazi mystics? I really like what they did in Indiana Jones with the Nazis, you know. Nazis like looking for occult artifacts and shit. Someone says you need to make a rap in E Prime. I did make a rap in E Prime actually. It was terrible, but that's how I found out what E Prime was because my friend Adam Rose, who I just did a performance with, he's from Antibody Corporation in Chicago. We're friends from Chicago. He had me write a rap in E Prime for a performance that we did, and that's how I came to learn about what E Prime was, period. And now I'm a big fan. Yeah, but this shit with Jung, okay. The shadow may appear in dreams and visions in various forms and typically appears as a person of the same sex as that of the dreamer. Ooh. The shadow's appearance and role depend greatly on the living experience of the individual because much of the shadow develops in the individual's mind rather than simply being inherited in the collective unconscious. Okay. Oh my god, collective unconscious has its own Wikipedia too. What does this say? Oh my god. Collective unconscious in German. Kollektives Überbewusstes. Unbewusstes. Refers to structures of the unconscious mind which are shared among beings of the same species. Oh, really? Haven't even heard that. So is there a collective unconscious of every species? I wonder what the collective unconscious is for like goldfish. It's just like bloop, bloop, bloop. Yeah, I mean, from what I understand about Jung, he's like really hippy dippy. Like, I think he kind of takes Freud and like turns it into some like, you know, Lord of the Rings type shit. Like, isn't the whole thing with the anima and the animus that like everybody has an inner feminine or masculine spirit? Like, get the fuck out of here, guy. I'm over it. But you know, like I was just saying a moment ago, I think that it's not a good thing that it seems like it's like a spiritual belief, you know. People have to spiritualize ideas of consciousness and conscious experience, and it's such a trap, and these same people will basically shame you for being closed-minded if you resist this, you know. Like, this is something I've dealt with a lot of people basically are like, oh, you think you're so smart, you're such a cold hard rationalist, blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, like, I'm trying to actually be open-minded by like not subscribing to these beliefs, you know. I'm open to anything, dude. Anything, for real. Like, Jesus could even be the divine son of God for all I fucking know. I'm open to it. I don't believe he is, but I'm open to it. I'm open to maybe we can astral project. I'm open to fucking astrology being real. I'm open to all of it. But what I believe in any given moment is only what seems most plausible to me, you know. So for one, my theories of consciousness that I have as an individual, I don't really subscribe to anything that even hints that consciousness is some singular functioning entity, you know. And to me, I think that we would be so much better served if we decided that instead of leaping to these assumptions that people like Elon Musk have made, where they're basically saying, you know, like, without a shadow of a doubt, I know that I can duplicate my consciousness. We're going to have AI. We're going to have sentient AI. We're going to have this. We're going to have that. To me, it's like it's like the secular version of people who are like overly enthusiastic about revelation in the Bible. Like, to me, they seem like doomsdayers or something, you know? Like, why are you assuming any of this is going to happen? Any of this is true? There's so many interesting things about consciousness. Like, we haven't even begun to map out a theory of consciousness that people can use. Even in our discussions about consciousness, we don't even have a definition that can be commonly referenced by everybody. Like, maybe we should work on this first. This is obviously a problem. Like, half of our conversations about consciousness are so hard to be had because there's not even one unified theory of consciousness. And this is why I only use what I think to be the most acceptable definition, which is the thing that I think everyone can agree with, which is consciousness is the feeling and the experience of being conscious. That's it. Whatever traits might exist beyond that, I think, they can exist, but they haven't been proven to exist. So I'm not going to assume that they do. I'm so much more interested in the qualities of conscious experience because I think, for one, this will give us great insight into how we can do what I was just saying, creating an actual map of conscious experience that we can use in our everyday conversations and also in clinical applications and also in scientific applications. And this is what science is very invested in doing right now. So I think that it's a waste of time and of resources if we're going to do things like pursue some Black Mirror fantasy dream where, like, we can download our conscious experience into a computer. It's like you're assuming that this thing is even possible. Why don't we first focus on just defining consciousness and its qualities, because clearly there's so many interesting things about it. And I think that's why we seduce ourselves into all these fantastical hypothetical scenarios regarding consciousness, like, oh, maybe one day I can put it into a fucking iPad or whatever the fuck. And for me, as a phenomenologist, one of the things that I think is most interesting about consciousness, and the thing that I desire an explanation for, would be the feeling of intentionality. And I think that this is true for a lot of people, and why people like Freud created entire theories of consciousness around this idea of there being the conscious mind and also the subconscious mind, because on some level, that's basically what he was describing. And if you look up what the subconscious is on, Google, it'll tell you that the subconscious is like everything you are conscious of that is not in focal awareness. And to me, this is, basically just some alt definition of intentionality. I think intentionality, trying to create a map of how we can describe intentionality, how it feels and what its processes are, I feel like this would be probably one of the first things we should be invested in doing. And, recently I found all of these neuroscientific papers of all very recent research being done right now on intentionality. Someone says, I never understood Husserl on intentionality. What is the object of a thought without intentionality? The object of a thought? What do you mean? Without intentionality? Well, Husserl, I think, would tell you that there is no thought without intentionality. And that's why, according to Husserl, intentionality was the fundamental property of all conscious experience. That's why his phenomenology defines intentionality as being, the thing that is most fundamental to conscious experience. I don't know if I agree with that necessarily. I mean, I don't agree with that necessarily, just because I think it's assumptive, and I think he doesn't necessarily give enough reason for why this should be assumed. But I think the underlying idea is one that I do agree with, that intentionality is very much something that seems like an emergent property of consciousness that probably needs to be explained and understood if we're going to have any sort of comprehensive theory of conscious experience, But like I was just saying, there's all these great papers coming out now, and I wish so badly that I had some more neuroscience understanding, because I want to understand these papers where all these neuroscientists right now are working really hard on creating a map of intentionality, period. If any of you are neuroscience students, by the way, or neuroscientists, I don't know if that's wishful thinking, but if you are, please get at me, because I would love to talk to somebody about this stuff. I really wish I understood, but I don't. But, they're basically doing things like brain imaging studies and such, like regarding things like focus, making something the object of your focus, and then compared to everything else you're peripherally aware of. Like, I've given this example a lot, probably in here, but one night this really fucked me up when I was thinking. I was actually talking to my friend, and we were at a wedding, and there was all of this phenomena going around us. There was loud music, there was people dancing, and I had to strain to hear my friend, to have this conversation with him at the bar. And I'm sure you've all had experiences like this where you're in a crowded space and you're speaking with another individual and you have to strain to hear what they're saying. But if you wanted to, you could also choose to tune them out and not really listen to what they're saying, even though you're hearing it, and focus instead on what's going on right next to you. Oh, I hear the people to the right of me are arguing about politics. I wonder what they're saying. I'm going to listen to them instead of listening to my friend. Or what's going on behind me, I'm going to listen to that instead. And then if you wanted to pretend that you were listening to your friend when he pauses and waits for your response, you can almost play back in your head like a fucking tape recording the last few words he said to process them and then respond. That's crazy. What's going on there? Clearly consciousness, consciousness has all of these properties that we haven't even really begun exploring, at least in conversation. To me, it's ridiculous that these aren't the things that we talk about in popular conversation. We've already jumped to the AI fucking future and Black Mirror fucking future. Your personality is downloaded into a little egg you keep on your fucking shelf. Hold on. Graham says, but his bracketing process was his basis of his phenomenology, no? I thought he tried to study phenomena by bracketing out the intentionality, and that's what I never got. Okay, so what you're speaking about is Husserl's method of phenomenology. It's not necessarily the philosophy of it himself, but Husserl's, what you just called bracketing, it's also called the epoche, which is a Greek word that means suspension of judgment. The skeptics used it a lot in ancient Greece. And the idea with the epoche and with Husserl, what he was trying to do was not to remove himself from intentionality, but remove, to the best of our abilities, everything that we know already about some sort of object or phenomena, So if I'm trying to observe the apple, right? I know the apple's red. I know I can eat the apple. I know this and that about the apple. If we want to make the apple the object of our phenomenological observation, and we're trying to use Husserl's method of bracketing or epoche to do this, we're not trying to make the apple not the intentional object of our focus. The apple will still remain the object of our focus, but we want to remove ourselves from everything we know about it, such as it's red, it's round, it's hard, And of course, this is impossible. It sounds almost spiritual, He didn't believe that you could actually remove everything that you know about this apple, but to the best of your abilities, because as you do this, your thought processes really do transform, I think, in a meaningful way. The apple is yellow. Well, I'm still working through Husserl's discography, but if I'm not mistaken, I believe that at some point he did say that you could reasonably change the color of objects in your mind. I think there's something to that idea. I've done it, but but only when I've been up for like 3 days on drugs, so I'm not sure if that counts. I did make something green recently without thinking about it. That was what was really cool. But I might have been dreaming while I was awake because this is something that I've done. Shout out perspectivism. There's no object without an interpretive framework. Well, it's really fun. I don't know if you're in our book club, but we just read Kant, and we were reading some of the beginning of Critique of Pure Reason. We read firstly his intro to the transcendental aesthetic, as well as some of his intro to the transcendental logic. And I thought what he was saying was really interesting because he basically comes from a similar idea, what you just said, there's no object without an interpretive framework, as far as we can understand it. But he makes the argument that actually there is a fundamental property to even the external world, and there should be in our philosophy, which he says is space, which I thought was very compelling because, depending on where you go with these different philosophies, I mean, ultimately it's all a choice, how we choose to structure our philosophies in a way that we think is the most meaningful and will bring us to the most meaningful conclusions and also give us the most room to work with and do interesting things in. But, oh fuck, I forgot what I was just saying. But I really like this idea, that concept, because a lot of people will make that the starting point of their philosophy. Like, okay, well, there's nothing without our subjective experience, right? Is this where our philosophy should start? But I think Kant makes a really good point that actually we should leave room in our philosophies for there being fundamental properties of our external environment, which allows us to perceive it at all in the first place. Because without a thing like space, there would be no perception, period. Whether or not space is only understood through our subjective framework, which it is, we can never know what space is in actuality. Space probably isn't anything in actuality because even the concept of is our human creation. We can only understand space through our perspective, the lens we have through which we experience space, both physically and then as a concept that we describe back to ourselves and use in our psychologies and our philosophies and our sciences. But, I think that's a really intriguing idea, and one that I haven't really thought much about, that even within these philosophies, especially things like phenomenology that center all experience around literal experience, or center all philosophy around the fact that it has to be experienced, that maybe it's meaningful in the philosophies to have categories for the things that precede experience itself, like space. This book is bad. Which book is bad? Was their philosophy what early humans, someone says? I mean, shit. Probably. Probably not spoken. But I think, people probably had moral, ethical concerns that they addressed with each other. even without speaking, just like the animals do. You know what I just found out? That was so interesting. I'm not sure which primate species it was. Maybe it was, I don't know. I want to say it was chimpanzees, but I just found out that chimpanzees are a bunch of murderous assholes that eat each other, which broke my heart. But it's some sort of gorillas or something. They have fights, and then sometimes to resolve the fight afterward they hug. Isn't that amazing? They fucking hug after beating the shit out of each other. That's a philosophical I mean, that's very philosophical. But everything is philosophical, It's like, what came first, language or the things we use to describe, or what language describes, which is experience. I think that probably something you could call a philosophical attitudes existed before philosophy. Like if someone goes around bonking everyone on the head, Like maybe the rest of the Neanderthals were like, hey, we don't like that guy. That's sort of like an ethical conclusion. Like, we're going to kick you out if you don't stop bonking everyone on the head. Whether or not they articulated any of these concepts with language, but if they all get together and are like, yo, beat the shit out of you, stop bonking everyone on the head, that's philosophical. It's very ethical. So I would say probably, yeah. Have you read 1984? I found it super interesting when he talks about how if you can learn to manipulate your own perception, then you can see anything. Like, you can truly believe that you are flying, and so it becomes true because it's what you believe. Do we think that's true, though? Because personally, I've encountered a lot of people that put forward these kinds of ideas, and I don't believe that they can really do the thing they say they can do. Can you guys make yourself believe you're flying right now? Or make yourself believe you're at the base of the Taj Mahal looking at it? I can't convince myself of that and make it real for myself. Can you? In a dream, probably. But other than that, no. I can't really. I don't feel I have much control over my conscious experience at all, This is why I think we root our reality in our understanding of the world, because we can't really turn it off. Like, as much as you could say this might be a hallucination, everything is perception, blah, blah, blah. It's like, well, why am I perceiving the specific things I'm perceiving? I didn't choose this. Right now I'm looking at a box. I didn't create this box. This box just happens to be here, and I can't make the box into something else in my perception. So I don't know how much I'm compelled by those ideas either. To me, it almost seems like more spiritualized ideas about experience that I don't put a lot of faith in. Put it this way, if no one contradicts you, you may believe something without evidence. Religion, ideology work like that. Yeah, well, this is something too that I talked a lot about in the video on this channel called Against Spirituality. And, I felt very validated when we did the David Hume reading, because I hadn't read Hume at all before I made this spirituality video, where I basically made the same exact argument Hume was making. So shout outs to me and shout outs to Hume. Not to toot my own horn, but that was very validating. Where basically, people are so invested in drawing these lines between matters of science and matters of spirituality or experience. There's this idea that there's some sort of like harsh divide in like literally the content of thinking. Like, people act like, oh, my belief in God cannot be rationalized, so stop trying to rationalize it. That's what faith is. But I disagree entirely with that notion. I think literally every idea we have is rational. Whether or not it holds to the criteria for what we establish as rational thinking correctly, it's still a rational conclusion. You don't believe in God for no reason. You believe in God because everything in your experience has led you to make this statement. It's led you to this conclusion. You see the world and you see like, oh, this is so beautiful. This is so amazing. I can't fathom that this wasn't a creation. That's a logical, rational conclusion. The same process that took somebody to conclude that there is a God is the same exact process I embarked on to conclude that there is no God. And if we wanted to, we could sit and map out exactly where we deviate, Now, of course, I believe that I'm the one that has not abandoned the fundamental properties of how we come to conclusions, period. Which is why I believe there is no God. But you believe how you believe, But ultimately, there's nothing different about these processes at all. It's not like, if this was true too, you would think like there'd be people who believe in all sorts of things for no fucking reason. Like, oh, well, I just randomly believe I have faith that there's like, a leprechaun under my bed. Like, why is God a popular one? You don't believe in God for no reason. That's not faith. You believe in God because there's reasons that you think there is a God. For one, so many people believe in God. That's how you know about this idea of God, because so many people do believe in it, and you learned about God from these people and this culture of people that believes in God. And then beyond that, you agree with the basic tenets of the thinking. You don't believe that this could have been a random thing. You believe that it has to have been a creation, yada fucking yada. Someone asked, do you think animals gossip with each other about other animals? Honestly, I've been getting so into animals. Like, I've been watching all these animal videos. Like, animals are fucking amazing. Like, and I think that the ways they communicate and build their own societies are so, they're treated so disrespectfully by us. Like, in what we literally do and how we physically interact with animals. But beyond that, just how we conceptualize them. Like, animals are smart as fuck, and they have societies and they have their own codes of ethics, and I believe definitely that they probably have languages that we like don't even think about at all, because we can't. I mean, we can't understand them, just like they probably can't understand us. But I'm sure, I'm positive I'm sure there's at least one species, yes, that gossips about each other. Definitely. Like, did you see what he did? That motherfucker. I'm sure of it. Like, just earlier today, I was watching a video of these birds. It was some like mating ritual, and it was just insane to me. They were literally taking turns. It was like one female bird at the end of the branch, and then there was a succession of male birds that I guess all do this little dance to impress the female, and they take turns. It was crazy. Like, one got up, did his dance, flew to the back of the line. The next one did his dance, and they just kept repeating this like a fucking circle. And the female bird's just sitting there staring. It's like, how much thinking is going on during this process? We treat animals like they're a bunch of fucking idiots. But like, there is just the fact that they formed a line. They're taking turns. They're taking turns for this specific mating ritual. They know that they're doing this with the purpose of impressing the female. The female is there as an audience member. She knows she's there with the purpose of picking a mate. Like, there is so much thinking going on during this display. It's amazing. And that's just one arbitrary example, from this random ass documentary I was just watching. But there's just so many examples of like all of this animal behavior where they're clearly fucking thinking and doing things with so much purpose. We act like they're a bunch of little fucking androids that have been pre-programmed to do stuff, but no, they are thinking conscious beings that do all sorts of intentional actions and clearly have their own processes of rationalizing, just like we do. Before we had language, we were still rational creatures. We were still making decisions based on what we observed in our external reality. Animals do the same exact thing. Whether or not we're a better built computer than some other animals, which I'm sure we are, it doesn't necessarily mean that other ones aren't. Someone says, do they know the purpose of their mating dance? I mean, I would assume so, because there was a winner declared, and then he got to fucking bust a nut in the female real quick. And it was crazy, too, because they basically, like, there was this whole, part of the ceremony, I guess you could call it, where she basically gives her consent, Like, they finished the dance, and then, like, she chose one. And I'm not even sure how she chose one, like, but they sat and waited. I think maybe with her, like, song or whatever. They didn't really say that, but she declared a winner. And it fucking popped behind her and busted a nut. Like, how could that be understood as anything other than intentional, Someone says, same person, maybe these birds are living fully in the subconscious like you were talking about earlier. Well, this is what I'm saying. I don't know if I really subscribe to this idea of the subconscious at all, because, yeah, like what I was saying earlier with like the fact that you can watch a video or watch a movie, and you're not actually consciously thinking back to yourself, this is what's happening, but you understand. Like, is that subconscious? This video or this movie I'm watching is like the center of my focus as I'm experiencing it, right? but I'm not calling to memory definitions or concepts as I do it. So what would you guys describe the process of watching a movie as, you know? When we're just sitting there watching it, we're not thinking in our heads with language, but we're conscious of the movie. Is that a conscious experience? Or is that subconscious, since within the movie we're calling to mind concepts, language, ideas that are already known to us, you know? Like, according to popular, are we thinking of consciousness in a human centric sense? Someone says. Well, I guess so, but I don't make much of a distinction between animal consciousness and human consciousness, you know? Because I think animals absolutely have concepts, and they come to be familiar with the concepts the same way we do. Basically, just through experience, you know? Makes me sad, this is a comment, makes me sad to know that animals don't understand our behavior. Literally, it's not because we are smarter, we just build over natural ecosystems. These animals may be conscious of what they're doing, but not in a way that makes sense to us. I mean, I don't know. I think, yeah, you're right. It doesn't make as much sense to us, but like, I think it could easily make sense to us. Like, when I think of animal consciousness, the way I contrast it to try to understand it better, I always think about like what humans were likely like before they had language, you know? And I imagine they did a lot of the same things we do. They just didn't have words. So I think, you know, some of the things that we do was probably impossible. Like, you know, sitting around like this and talking. Though I'm sure that language probably happened through like talking almost like babies do, you know, trying to like have trying to be like stress emotion through your intonation and shit until eventually maybe a system emerged. I'm sure it took millions and millions of years. I heard an idea that animals learn about concepts over time, whilst we learn a lot in our life. Well, I think that, you know, I think animals obviously have a conceptual framework, you know, just like we do. Because it's like we use the word concept, and I think we easily start to think of things like, you know, philosophy and poetic language and all this. But a concept is really just a category in your head, which is like an abstraction. It could be an abstraction of some sort of external phenomena. Okay, so like even the wall in front of me, that's a concept in my head. The wall may exist in actuality, and I would say it likely does. But the concept of the wall is simply a category in my head that I use my understanding of as a concept to interact with. And I would say that the animal has the same exact thing, you know. Like my pet bunny, Steven, who is a genius, I may add, he definitely has a concept for the wall. I mean, Steven runs around like a fucking madman, and I've never seen him run into the wall. And this is because I believe very much Steven also has a concept. Steven has a category for the wall. And the category and the concept of the wall, I think, became stronger and more definitive as time went on. I don't think he had as strong of a concept of a wall when he was a baby bunny. You know, when he was a baby bunny, he would definitely bump into stuff more. He would do things that seemed dumber. Steven definitely, I think, has created concepts through interacting with his observable reality over time, you know? And this is why now he can run around super fucking fast and never worry about bumping into the wall, because he has a concept of the wall, a category for the wall in his head. And this is what I say when I say This is what I mean when I say I think animals also have concepts. They also have categories for all these things. You know, the idea that you want to lay down is a concept. That's a category. You know that you're tired, you want to rest. Animals do this as well. You know, they know they're hungry, they want to go get some food. Even if they're following an impulse that is rooted in physicality, you know, I feel discomfort because I'm hungry or because I'm thirsty. You know what to do when that happens. But when you're a baby, you don't. This is why, you know, little baby birds just sit in their nest and scream all fucking day because they don't know how to acquire comfort. They just know they feel discomfort because they're hungry. The mom knows that the discomfort is them being hungry, and that to alleviate the discomfort, they have to give them something to eat or to drink. But the babies don't know this. The babies just sit and fucking scream. But the mom knows, okay, I gotta help my babies. They're my babies. There's just so much knowing. There's so many concepts that depend. Yeah, I mean, for any of these things to happen, for animals, for humans, these are all concepts and categories that animals clearly have distinct categories for these things, and they interact with them, I would say, in a conscious way, obviously. I shouldn't say obviously, but I mean, it seems like the more I think about it, the more I feel very strongly that animal consciousness and our consciousness really is not different at all in a meaningful way. I think that it's just we have different kinds of intelligence depending on our brain, which ultimately is, you know, the platform for, or I guess you could say the computer. I think about like intelligence, or maybe it's not even a good analogy. Probably isn't. But, you know, maybe I'm a MacBook and Steven is a microwave, you know. The same electricity that flows through him flows through me. But perhaps I am a better built machine in the sense that I'm capable of more. But I'm only capable of more anyway in my perspective, you know. Of course, I'm going to posit myself as the superior animal. But Steven would and should posit himself as the superior animal because he is in his world. He's the center of his own universe because, you know, in rabbit world, all of experience can only be described in rabbit terms through rabbit understanding. The same is true for us, you know. We're not objectively a better animal, but of course it makes sense that we're a better animal in our own worldview because our worldview has to center around our human experience. But I wouldn't expect any other animal to center us as being the superior animal. I would hope that they center themselves. My point is that humans are not better, but they have a certain access to a world that is transcendental. I would disagree, honestly. Because what is transcendental about human experience, you know? All of these concepts that we interact with are our creation. So in that sense, we're not really transcending anything about our own intelligence. We've just created games and a system through which we can make our own worldview more infinitely complicated. But I don't think, first of all, like I just said, that that's a good enough reason to call our experience transcendental or like fundamentally different than animals' experience. And on top of that, I would say that it's not even true that this is a thing that is unique to us. Because, like I was talking about earlier, think about these gorilla populations or whatever kind of monkeys they were that hug after fights. You know, what is that if not also something similar to what you're talking about with humans creating some sort of transcendental world to interact with? I would say that that's also true in instances like this, you know. Why would animals hug after a fight? If that's not some sort of, that's like so conceptual. That's so hard for me to even think about. Like, why would they do that? That's totally a conceptual decision they're interacting with concepts in their head that seem similar to ours. Like, I don't want to fight with you. I want to make amends. I want to show you I love you. Like, we're in this together, bro. That's so conceptual. It's like impossible for me to wrap my mind around. All right, it's been like an hour and 5 minutes. I think I'm going to get out of here. I just needed to wake up a bit. Thanks for listening. I didn't even really talk about what I was supposed to talk about, but, you know, trying to keep this live stream behavior going. Thank you for listening. I'm going to be waking up and getting to work. I'll be in the Phenomenology Club Discord chat, by the way. If any of you aren't members, pop on in there, because I'll be in there all fucking night. We can keep talking until the fucking cows come home. Alright, guys, thanks. Love you. I'll talk to you soon. Peace.